Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to start off today's lecture with economics. And the question we'll be taking up is, how is a natural economy different from a market economy? Okay, well, this may seem like a strange place to start off with. After all, some of you are probably thinking, I thought Western civilization was a history class and not an economics class. And you're right, sort of. It's been recognized, though, for a long time that economics is a driving factor of history. For some historians and social scientists and economists, they think it's the primary one. I'm not willing to go quite that far, but I do think it's really important. If you think about what economics is the study of production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. And so, what does that mean exactly? Well, production is what is produced and how is it produced. All right? And so, if you think about it, production refers to all the things that a country produces, or a household, or whatever the unit is that you're examining. And so, countries with high productivity tend to be wealthy countries because they produce a lot. Conversely, countries with low productivity, they don't produce much, and so their citizens tend to be poor. Not everybody necessarily, but the vast majority of people do. And so production alone is important. If we examine the second part of that, distribution, this is also really important. Because distribution is who gets what. Who gets a bigger cut? Who gets a smaller cut? And then consumption, of course, is the final product, who gets to consume and what are they consuming. All right. And so economics is really important. And it's something that will be central to this particular class. Now, I want to go back to that second part, distribution. The method of distribution has been different over the centuries. And we'll see that the early Middle Ages, where we're going to be starting, had a different method than what we're accustomed to today. All right, so let's get into things. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that in the Middle Ages, agricultural wealth was the primary form of wealth. That meant that if you owned land or had access to land, this made you wealthy in this particular society. Now, this isn't the case so much today, right? You could probably tell me who some rich people are in the United States, but probably farmers don't really come up very high on that list. I don't know who the richest farmer is, but I would severely doubt if he made the top 100 or top 1,000 even. Okay? And so agricultural wealth isn't as important. Now, this is not to say that agriculture isn't important today. Obviously, this high-tech economy and advanced society we have would not be possible without agriculture, right? We'd all starve to death. But in this simple economy, where they didn't have all the goods and services we have, land was it. Land is critical in any age because people need to eat. It doesn't matter how primitive your economy is. If you don't have an agricultural base of some sort, then people are going to starve to death. And so In our medieval economy here, money wasn't a factor. There really wasn't much in the way of money at all. It had fallen out of circulation. There wasn't a lot of other types of goods, and so land was pretty much it. Now, when we think about farms today, we probably imagine maybe a farmhouse with a silo and, a lot of rows of corn or something in front of it. That wasn't how land was divided in the Middle Ages, though. Land was divided into manors. All right. And a manor was kind of like a little village, sort of. And they usually had a couple of features. So there would be farmland, obviously. And then there would be a village in the middle of that farmland. This is where the agricultural workers would live. There would usually be a manor house or a castle of some sort. And maybe a church. Okay, and this is pretty much it. And so if you were to zoom out and look all over Europe, you'd find lots of forests, but interspersed with these manors. Now, one feature of a manor is manors are what are called closed economic systems. What is that? Well, a closed economic system is an economic system in which most of what is consumed is produced there, and most of what is consumed is produced there, and most of what is produced is consumed. That is to say, the people in a closed economic system do not really trade with the outside world. All right. In the Middle Ages, it was very dangerous to travel. Some of you may have seen Robin Hood, right? And when, people would go out into the forests, it was pretty damn dangerous, right? And so you wouldn't want to do that too often. The other thing is there really wasn't a lot to buy. People, if you went to the next manor, they produced pretty much the same thing. And so anything you needed had to be produced on the manor. All right. Now, an important economic concept when considering the Middle Ages is the fact that it was a natural economic system. That's what they call. All right. Now, natural economies are unnatural to us in the 21st century because we don't really have it so much, but it's the way things have traditionally been done throughout most of human history. All right. You may be surprised to know that we live in abnormal times in the 20th and 21st century. People live much differently than we do, and this was certainly the case of the economic system. One of the big things that was lacking was this idea of exchange of goods, which we've just mentioned. All right. And so when we talk about distribution in a natural economy, it's not based off of trade or buying or selling. It's based off of tradition. So who got what cut was based on a traditional arrangement of some sort. Who did what work was based off of a traditional arrangement. All right. There wasn't money that changed hands. There wasn't anything like that. Instead, everybody had obligations to fulfill around the manor, and everybody got a traditional cut of some sort. Now, the most common scenario was that of a peasant. All right, most 95% of people in the Middle Ages were peasants, and the traditional arrangement was they got to live on the manor and they got to use the lord of that manor's land, but they had to do work part of the time for him. So traditionally, peasants got enough land for themselves, and they would work this land for 3 days, and there was additional land set aside in which they would work the next 3 days and they'd get Sundays off. All right. And so the traditional arrangement in most manors, distribution wise, was that the Lord got 50% of the takeaway. I mean, he got 50% of the what the manor produced, and peasants, the other 50% they distributed amongst themselves. So maybe the best way to think about this is like a household. Manors, in a lot of ways, were like households. All right. In a typical household, chores are allotted based on some kind of tradition. Maybe the person who's best at cooking cooks, and maybe the one who's not good at cooking can wash the dishes. Maybe one does laundry, and another one does housekeeping of some sort. All right. Now, there's really no money that gets transferred, right? In other words, growing up, you probably didn't probably didn't pay your mom money because she cooked for you, right? It was just kind of what she did. Um, you didn't pay your little brother because he took out the trash. That's maybe just what he did. All right. And, maybe everybody got, you know, someone got the biggest piece of pie at whatever the case was. Okay. Now, one of the things I want to point your attention to is this idea of productivity. In this particular arrangement on a manor, what kind of incentive would there be for a typical peasant to become more productive? Say, I don't know, instead of working 10 hours a day, maybe work 12. Would there be any incentive for that? And if you think about it, the answer is no. Why would you work harder if you were a peasant? I mean, after all, you're giving 50% of it away anyways if you're to your lord. And even if you do work harder and somehow create more grain, well, what are you going to do with the extra grain? I mean, once you've eaten your fill, what do you do with the rest? Now, today, if somehow you came upon 100 bushels of grain and you were ambitious, you might try to sell them. But we have to remember that the manor was a closed economic system, and so this wasn't really available to most people. All right, this idea of selling. And so the lesson here is that productivity tended to be pretty low in the Middle Ages, and that was owing in large part to this economic system. Of course, I said productivity, high levels of productivity equal high levels of wealth, and so we can imagine that the Middle Ages in Europe anyways was a pretty poor time. All right. Well, I want to talk about one other aspect of life on the manor, and that was the lack of private property. Now, manors were the lords to some degree, as much as people thought of private property back then, which they didn't really. He definitely was the man in charge of this particular piece of land. But for reasons we'll see later, he didn't actually do any of the work on it. He was just there to manage it and protect it. And it was the serfs and the peasants who would work it. Now, the land itself that peasants had by custom was different every single year. As you can see in this map, the manor was cut into different strips, these long strips of land. And peasants would be given some of these strips for themselves, And they'd be given some of these strips to work on behalf of the Lord. Okay? But the thing is that these strips of land which you were given were different every single year. All right, so every single year is kind of like an etch a sketch. They shook it up and did it over again, divvied it out like a deck of cards, just shuffled them up and redistributed them out. Okay, well, why is this important? Well, it's important because part of the idea of making improvements, land, like many things, is something that can be improved. It can become more productive if you invest in it. But people generally don't invest in something that they don't own. For instance, you may enjoy the park across the street from you, but it's pretty unlikely, unless you're really into that sort of stuff, that you're going to go and mow the grass there, or that you're going to run to Home Depot and buy some tulips to make the place look better, right? Because it's not yours. Well, the same applies to land. People didn't own the land, and so there was really no incentive to improve upon it. Furthermore, people in the early Middle Ages tended to be serfs. Now, a serf is somewhere between a peasant and a slave, probably closer to slavery because you didn't have any freedom. You didn't own your own labor. You were bound to the land, and the land was owned by a lord. And so you didn't really have any choice in the matter. You were born a peasant and or a serf, and you would die a serf. The only occupation open to you was agricultural laborer. If you tried to leave, you were brought back in chains and probably branded or some sort. Perhaps something worse would happen to you. All right. You were required to work so many days on behalf of your Lord, usually 3. All right. And so your labor wasn't really yours to sell. You were not a free laborer. All right. So that's another factor here. All right. Well, aside from this system, there was another system that began to develop in the Middle Ages. And this was what is called the market economy. Now, this whole time, I've been describing conditions of the Middle Ages, but these were the conditions only in Europe, which tended to be more backwards than other places around the world. Certainly more backward than the Middle East, or India, or China. And Europe was actually stimulated by contact with some of these other civilizations, particularly the Islamic world. All right. In the Islamic world, for all the way from the time of the ancients, Greeks, Romans, later when it converted, when Islam became the dominant religion, the market economy never died out. All right. Now, the Italians were well placed to take advantage of trade with the East, the Islamic world. Italy, which is shaped like a boot, you can probably see it toward the bottom of this map here, is located on the Mediterranean, which is this body of water, which connects it to North Africa and to the Middle East, the Islamic world. Now, the Italian traders in the Middle Ages became very wealthy by becoming middlemen between the East and between Europe. All right. The East had all kinds of exotic goods and spices and teas and Persian rugs and silks and all those exotic things that people wanted, dreamed of. And the Italians would trade these things for what Europe produced, which wasn't much, but Europe did have natural resources like timber and iron and slaves, and they would trade these to the East. And so slowly, what happened is money got injected into Europe, all right, at least into Italy at first. This phenomena soon spread north. You'll notice there's an area in orange toward the top, and to the left of this, there's cities like Antwerp and Hamburg. And these cities of Northern Europe also became involved in this market economy. And other cities began to develop, all taking part in these markets. Well, perhaps it's a good time to try to examine exactly what a market is. Well, I think we all have experiences of some sort. I remember when I was first learning this, I always thought stop and shop when I thought markets. But perhaps a farmer's market would be better as an example. A place where people come together, bring their goods, and trade or sell them to others, and buy other things they need. And so this is really what a market is all about. It's a place where you exchange. You come with a surplus of things that you're willing to part with, and you get things that you want or need. All right. And so this really reorients the way people think about goods, the way they think about services. Now, in a manner, when we think of food and we think of service, we're thinking primarily about satisfying our own wants, right? The peasant gets up every day to work so that he has enough food to feed his family and to make enough so that the Lord leaves him alone. But when we work for the market, most of what we produce, we do not consume ourselves. Most of what we consume, we do not produce ourselves. Anyone who's ever worked in a fast food restaurant or in a any kind of restaurant, really, you may make 1,000 burgers a day. Maybe you eat one of those, but the other 99.99% are for someone else. So you're producing for the market here. Furthermore, if you work at a fast food restaurant, it's likely that you take part of the salary that you make and buy things that you need. Pay your rent or buy other types of food or entertainment, whatever. Okay, so the point is that you begin to produce for the market. And so how does one become rich? This is true of the Middle Ages, and this is true of today. What you do is you meet the demands of the market. Okay? If you meet the demands of the market, you become rich. The market takes care of you. So Bill Gates, formerly the richest man in the world, how did he become the richest man in the world? Well, he produced something that made it easy for people to use computers, Windows. And as a result of that, because computers were important to people and many people purchased these, he was rewarded for this. 50 Cent. Why is he a rich man? Well, because he produces things that people want to consume. He produces music. People want to consume this, and so he's rewarded for this. All right. So the point here is that if you're more productive in a market system, if you produce more of what the market wants, you become rich. You are rewarded for it. So productivity is rewarded in a market economy. And again, I go back to our uh, our maxim from the beginning: productivity determines the wealth of a nation or the wealth of any family, whatever. Productivity equals wealth. So we can see, to the degree that the market economy thrives, Europe was going to become more rich. Also, critical to this is the idea of private property and free labor. All right. One needs to have assurances that one's property is going to be protected and recognized, and one's own, and free to do with as they please, right? So you're not going to really have much incentive to invest in some sort of productivity or some sort of thing if that thing can be snatched away from you at any time. So private property is important. Also, free labor. The idea that you must be free to produce those things which you believe will make you the most money in the market. Critical to this whole arrangement also are individuals called merchants. Okay? These are the people who bring goods and services to market. They buy cheaply in one place and they bring it to a place where that thing is in demand. They buy in a place where the supply of something is high and bring it to a place where the supply is low and the demand is high. And because they do this, they're rewarded for this service. Sometimes this is a local arrangement. Maybe they go to a local farm and bring it to a city. Maybe they do it on a regional basis, or in some cases, internationally. All right? And so they're rewarded for this. If you think about who the richest man in the world is now, it's Jeff Bezos. At least until he gets divorced, he'll be the richest man in the world. What does Jeff Bezos do? He buys things cheaply and sells them at a higher price. He buys things mostly from China, puts them on Amazon, sells them for a higher price, and because he provides this service in a convenient way, people reward him for it. Market rewards him for it, I guess I should say. Okay. Well, what are the origins of this whole system? Well, I shouldn't say what are the origins of this whole system. I should say what are the origins of urbanization, because alongside the market economy, cities grow. Okay? And there's a reason for this. This isn't a coincidence. Let's take a look back at something that we've already said. All right, so we've said that life was dangerous in the Middle Ages. It was dangerous for merchants, right? You can imagine walking around the deep, dark woods of Europe with bags full of money. Not a safe place to be. Okay? And so what would happen is many of these merchants would try and set up shop in places that were safe. All right? Now, the Middle Ages didn't have really any cities worth speaking of. And so what merchants would try to do is they try to go to some fortified location, a place with walls, maybe a castle, or some sort of fortification like this. Now, a walled fortified location in medieval French is called a Borg, Bourge, I believe. In medieval French, it's called a burg, Burg. Um, Now, one who lived in a burg was called a burger, Burgher, in German. And in French, they were called a bourgeoisie, right? This basically means a burg dweller and later a town dweller. And so you can highlight that term because it's one that we're going to be using a lot in this course. All right. So a bourgeoisie. All right. So they'd set up shop outside of these cities, and soon these became population centers, right? As more merchants began to settle there. And this phenomena, as I mentioned, grew um, primarily in northern Italy, like I've said, and also in the area called the Low Countries. You can see where the cities are located here, right? And so, yeah, you'll see this in Western Europe. Now, one of the things I want to draw your attention to is this big area in white. It's kind of like where the lines are and the map key here. That's Eastern Europe. And one of the big things that we'll see in this class is that in the Middle Ages and even in early modern time, Eastern Europe is going to be behind. They don't have a lot of cities. All right. And that's going to be one of the phenomena. They have a more primitive economy. They have a more rural economy. All right. In addition to um, in addition to merchants, other people are soon attracted to this city, namely craftsmen, people who make stuff. All right. Now, it's good for craftsmen to live next to these fortified locations for the same reason. If you're a cobbler, it's dangerous, right? People might want to rob you of your shoes that you have as you're pedaling around. And so they try to set up shop in one of these safe locations. Also, there's merchants there. And perhaps merchants can help sell their stuff or if they need to buy things. Okay? Now, one of the things that medieval people tended to do, medieval crafts were divided into guilds. So all of the cobblers would be members of the Cobblers Guild, and the Carpenters Guild, and masons, and whatever the case is. Okay, and guilds were there to protect the workers. One of the things that guilds did is they limited the amount of people who could engage in that particular profession. So if you were a really good cobbler and you went to a town, you wouldn't necessarily be able to just open up shop in that particular town. You had to be a member of the guild. And the thinking was is that if you had too many people cobbling, for instance, then you would saturate the market. There would be too many people doing that, and everybody would go hungry. And so guilds tried to limit the number of people who could engage in that particular profession. Guilds would also try to spread the work around so that everybody had just about enough and everybody ate. And they would also try to keep the quality high because goods were stamped with the guild logo on it and not with any individual person. So if one member was doing shoddy work, it would be bad for everybody. Now, typically in a guild, not everybody was equal. All right. The top people in a guild were called guild masters. A guild master was a full-fledged guild member. All right. And so for a guildmaster, guildmasters would own their own shop. Usually their house in the bottom floor would have a window in it or some sort. They'd hang a shingle outside. They would own their own tools, whatever it was. If you're a cobbler, a hammer and nails and whatever else scissors, whatever else it takes to cobble. In addition to that, you would have raw materials that you would need: leather, um, soles, whatever medieval shoes were made out of. And then you would also be an entrepreneur of some sort, because you would sell the stuff that you made. You'd put it out in front of your window, and people coming by could come by and buy shoes off you. So you did all of these different things. All right. Now, below full-fledged guildmasters were journeymen. And these were people that didn't really own anything, but they received pay. They received a salary for their work. And the hope is they would be able to save up enough of this and one day become a full-fledged guildmaster when there was an opening. And lastly, at the bottom were apprentices. And these were usually boys, younger boys, 8 to 12 years old. And you were basically just learning. You were just getting started, probably doing jobs no one else wanted to do, right? You weren't skilled yet. Okay. And so, urban life. Now, one of the things that I want to mention is that the market economy had a ripple effect. A ripple effect into nearby manors. All right? So we can imagine a scenario in which maybe a local lord comes by and there's a city nearby, and he goes into the city and maybe there are Italian merchants there with spices. And he looks and he sees a place and there's a Persian rug. He looks and he sees silks and all these wonderful, wonderful things that would look great in his castle and would make his lady look fantastic. But the problem is he doesn't have any money because, he gets grain. So that kind of sucks if you're a medieval lord, right? And so what medieval lords begin to do is they get into this whole process themselves. And so what we start to see in the West is the rise of tenant farming. All over Western Europe, lords begin to emancipate their serfs. They begin to free their serfs, and they become landlords. So now the serf's free. He can come and go as he pleases. He can leave if he wants. But if he stays, he needs to pay that particular lord rent on his land. And so either the peasant needs to sell it to a merchant or bring it to market themselves or whatever the case is, but they've got to come up with their rents. All right. And now the lord has money. And now the manor is connected to that local city, supplying it with what the city doesn't have, which is food. All right. Now, I just want to mention that this whole process that we're talking about is localized to Western Europe. There's a maroon-colored line on the map. And that maroon-colored line is a line showing a political entity called the Holy Roman Empire. But on the right side, that line is kind of a dividing line between East and West. And you can see, based off of the color coding here, that the West has a much denser population, more cities. The East, excuse me, has less. Okay, there's not a lot of cities. There is no bourgeoisie worth speaking of in the East. And so everything we've described is a Western phenomena in regards to the market economy. In the East, peasants were not freed. Um, the manners did not become part of the market economy. As a matter of fact, the opposite was happening in the East. It was becoming less and less free. Peasants were becoming serfs, and lords were dominating them more than ever before. And agriculture was still the dominant form of production there. All right, so I want to bring that east-west distinction because that's something we're going to follow throughout this course. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I would like you to answer this question. How is a natural economy different from a market economy? So go into the discussion board forum, click a new thread, and answer this question.